The check engine light came on 9 months ago and you named it. You call it Gary. Gary flickers when you take the on-ramp too fast, and you take the on-ramp too fast anyway, because you have merged onto I-35 4,000 times, and you know exactly how much the transmission can take before it complains. The complaint sounds like a man clearing his throat underwater. You stopped hearing it as a problem years ago. You hear it as hello. It's a 2004 Honda Civic. You paid $2,000 cash for it when you were 24. You're 34 now. You make $61,000 a year in the finance department of a car dealership. The account side, reconciling the price of trucks, everyone assumes you'll never afford. And every morning, you park your $2,000 Civic in a lot full of $70,000 ones. The engine catches on the second try. It always catches on the second try. While the heat kicks in, you do the thing you always do. You open the banking app and you look at a number. You have never told a single living person the truth about that number. Hold on to that. It's the whole story. 10 years ago, the salesman's name was Dale. You remember Dale because Dale looked at you for exactly as long as it took to decide you weren't worth the walk across the floor. You'd come in to price a certified pre-owned Accord, the responsible adult purchase, the one everyone says you're supposed to make once you've got a real job. Dale glanced at your shoes. He glanced at your haircut. He said, without quite meeting your eyes, "Somebody'll be right with you." Nobody was. For 26 minutes, you counted every one, you walked out, and somewhere on the drive home, you did the math that would quietly run the next decade of your life. That Accord was going to run about $480 a month for 5 years. Dale was going to make his commission on the assumption you'd sign for it. And you thought, what if I don't? What if I just don't? So you bought the Civic, $2,000, cash, from a guy on Facebook Marketplace whose garage smelled like motor oil and old carpet. And then you did the thing I want you to agree with, because your agreement is the trap. You took the $480 a month you would have spent on the Accord and you set up an automatic transfer, same day every month, into a boring total market index fund, the one nobody at a party has ever gotten excited about, gone before you could feel it leave. You didn't call it investing, you called it the payment. You'd already decided you were a guy with a car payment. You just made the payment to yourself. Reasonable, right? You'd nod if a friend told you they did that. That's how it gets you, because the boring decision, repeated, doesn't feel like discipline. It feels like deprivation. Every single day, for years, while the whole world upgrades around you in high definition. Take Marcus. Marcus started the same month. Desk catty corner from yours, and Marcus understood something you apparently didn't. That a job like this is a costume, and the costume needs a car. Year 1, he leased a Camry. Year 4, the Camry became a 4Runner. Year 7, a Tacoma with the package, the seats that hug you. He'd toss you the fob in the lot. Take her around the block, man. You gotta feel this. And look at your Civic with an expression that wasn't cruelty. It was worse. It was pity. Gentle, genuine pity. And that's the part that got under your skin and stayed there. You never told Marcus that a lease is just a subscription to something you'll never own. That a new car loses about 20% of its value the second it leaves the lot, 60% inside 5 years. That he was paying full price to rent the steepest part of the drop, over and over on a loop forever. You didn't tell him, partly because it meant explaining the number. But partly, be honest, because there was a small, ugly, warm satisfaction in being underestimated on purpose. You told yourself it was humility. It wasn't. You were hoarding a secret and it kept you warm at night, and that is not the same thing as being a good person. There's the decision you'll disagree with. Not the car, the pleasure you took in the lie. Meanwhile, the math is doing what math does when you leave it alone in a dark room for 10 years. Year one, you've put in $5,700 and it's grown by a few hundred, and you think, this is it? This is the magic? Marcus is driving a Tacoma and I've earned enough to buy him lunch. And then, somewhere around year 6, something happens no chart prepares you for. The account grows more in a single year than you put in that year. Read that again. The money starts out-earning you. The second worker you hired with the payment you never made starts pulling harder than the payment itself. You notice it at a red light on Lamar, and you almost run the green because you can't stop staring, and the guy behind you leans on the horn, and you drive through with your heart going like a rabbit, thinking, it's alive. It grew while I slept. It grew while I sat in a meeting about floor plan financing. It grew on a Tuesday when I didn't think about it once. That's compounding. Nobody feels it because all the action is backloaded. The last third of the curve holds most of the fortune, which means the people who quit at year 3, the ones who say, investing doesn't work, I tried it, quit 40 feet from where the ground opens up. The car, of course, is falling apart. The AC died the summer of year 7, and you decided, in a fit of stubbornness you couldn't defend to a therapist, to simply become a man who doesn't use AC. You drive to work with the windows down and your dress shirt going translucent in the Texas heat, telling people you like the airflow. You don't like the airflow. You're proving something to a salesman who doesn't remember you exist. Your mother rides with you at Thanksgiving. She goes quiet at a stoplight and then says, not unkindly, the sentence that lives in you. Honey, are you doing okay? Money-wise? And you do the math while she's asking. You have just under $200,000 in that account. You're wearing a frayed collar in a car with no air conditioning, and your mother is offering to help, and you say, I'm fine, Mom. She pats your hand. She thinks she's being brave for you. You let her. That's the second lie, and it costs more than the first. Because your mother spent that whole holiday quietly grieving a version of your life that didn't exist. You could have handed her the phone. You chose the drama of the secret over the comfort of your own mother. Marcus, around this time, hits a wall you don't see coming. The Tacoma gets repossessed. Quietly. He parks in the back of the lot for a week and you don't understand why until you do. A medical thing with his wife. A deductible. An out-of-pocket max. A number with a comma he didn't have. The truck was the first domino, because it was the only thing he could sell fast, except he couldn't sell it, because he owed more than it was worth. That steep part of the curve again, the one he kept renting. He was underwater on a truck while his wife was in a hospital, and he never told anybody either. But here's where the story refuses to be clean. 6 months later, Marcus claws back, gets on a plan, buys a used Corolla with cash, your exact decision, 8 years late, and shows up one Monday lighter somehow, unburdened, and leans on your desk and says, you know what, man? I think you had it figured out this whole time. And he means it, and it's the most generous thing anyone says to you in 10 years, and you almost tell him you don't. Nah, you say. I just got lucky with a reliable car. Third lie. The cheapest one and the one you regret most, because Marcus was holding open a door back into being a person who has friends instead of secrets, and you closed it to protect a number. The number, by year 10, has done the thing. You put in less than 60 grand total over 10 years, the price of one nice truck Marcus financed twice, but the account is more than $100,000 past that. More than half the balance is growth you never earned with your hands. You built a second income out of a decision you made at 24 in a garage that smelled like old carpet, and it never called in sick, never asked for a raise, never needed the AC fixed. And that's when you hear it, the reset. The dealership is for sale, not a car on the lot. The dealership, the building, the franchise, the land off the access road, the owner's retiring, and the numbers are on your desk because you're the one who reconciles them. And you know something the market doesn't. You know the real estate is the asset and the car sales are almost a distraction. You know the land under a dealership on a growing corridor outlives everyone who ever stood on it. You don't have the cash to buy it outright. Nobody does. But you have something better, a real down payment, a decade of clean financials with your name on every one, and a loan officer who takes you seriously the second you slide the brokerage statement across his desk. Because the one thing every lender is actually buying is proof that you're a person who, handed money over time, does the boring thing with it. Every time, for 10 years, without being watched. Your down payment is the compounding. The thing they mocked is the thing that qualifies you. You use a chunk of the account, not all of it. You leave the engine running, but enough. And you don't sell in a panic and eat a giant tax bill in 1 year. You held those shares a decade, so it's long-term gains, taxed at roughly half the rate of your salary. The tax code rewards patience in a way it will never advertise. You just collected a reward that was sitting there in plain sight the whole time, that Dale and Marcus and your worried mother never once thought to read. You walk onto the showroom floor on a Tuesday, windows down weather, Gary flickering in the lot in salute, and Dale is still there. Older, softer around the middle. Dale never bought the boring fund. Dale sold cars for 30 years, rented the whole time, and Dale is going to work until his body won't let him. And none of that is funny. It's just the other side of the same math. Dale sees you crossing the floor in your frayed collar, reads your shoes and your haircut the way he's read them for 30 years, and half turns toward a customer near the trucks. "Somebody'll be right with you," Dale says, and you keep walking. Past the trucks, past the sales desks, toward the office in the back where the owner and the lawyer are waiting with a stack of paper that has your name on every page. You don't correct him. You don't announce yourself. You don't get the movie moment where you turn and deliver the line you've rehearsed in the shower for 10 years, because you realize, standing here, that the line was always for you and never for him. You put your hand on the office door, and you think about your mother patting your hand at that stoplight, about Marcus leaning on your desk, about every door you close to protect a number that's about to become a building. And for the first time in 10 years, you're not sure the trade was worth what it cost. And there's no one left to ask, because you never let anyone close enough to know the question existed. You sign your name 11 times. 6 years later, there's a kid, 23, walking the lot in bad shoes. He's been standing near the used inventory for 19 minutes and nobody has crossed the floor. You're watching him from the window of the office that used to belong to a man who couldn't be bothered, and you're wondering whether the version of him who buys the $2,000 car and the version who signs for the Accord are already, right now, standing in the same body, and which one walks out that door. And you're reaching for your keys. Gary's long gone, sold for scrap. The new car starts on the first try every time, and you've never once gotten used to it. You take the stairs down 2 at a time, and you still don't know what you're going to say.